One of the challenges and privileges of being a preacher is that we are expected to give thought to seek to articulate, to even attempt to answer the big questions of life. You know the big questions. There are big questions and there are little questions. The big questions. Is there God? How do we know? Where are we going with this thing we call the human endeavor? What is our destiny? Why are we here? Is love stronger than hate? And we think, I've always thought, that we come to church to consider these, the big questions. And the little ones, oh, they're for out there. Out there in the world. The little questions. What car should I get? What house should I buy? When should I retire? Where shall we eat tonight? What shall I wear to work tomorrow? What do I do now? Been there, done that. Big questions, little questions, they're different. Or are they? Recently I was on a walk at one of my favorite places in the rolling hills of the neighborhood where I live. Each home out there is very expensive. It was one of those places where there was a lot of farming, and the farmers realized they could make more money by selling to develop. And so they sold out there near Maple Plain, and the lots are a minimum of 3 acres, some of them 10 acres. And the homes that are on these lots are just huge, just really, really big homes, right there in the neighborhood where I live. They're all that way. Well, except our home. Ours is about 1,400 square feet. Folks out there drive by and see our home and think, oh, look at that cute little garage. But where is the house, they say. Anyway, on my walks, I struck up a casual friendship with one of the homeowners, Bob. I learned that he had been very high up in one of the world's most famous corporations, made a lot of money, and then had opted for one of those early retirement packages, where the company actually pays you a lump sum, huge, to retire early. Bob had taken this option only in his early 50s. To say he had it made would be a significant understatement. As I walked by this day, Bob saw me and called me over to the driveway. As I approached, I saw he was polishing the chrome of a very large car. "Look at my baby," he exclaimed. I looked. It was exquisite. I learned from him, maybe some of you will know this car, it was a 1950s Chrysler Imperial. One of only, he said, 5,000 ever made. It had been his dad's when Bob was a boy. He had a picture he showed me of Bob standing by the car on the way to his high school prom. It had been in a shop now for over a year being refurbished. And Bob, oh my goodness, he was so excited. He showed me everything about it. He had me in the car, and out of the car, in the trunk, out of the trunk. Just showing me every gadget, everything about it. Till finally he stopped and said, "I'm just like a kid with a new toy." "Oh well," he said, "you got to have something in life to be excited about." And I realized later, as I thought about what he said, that all of our little questions really lead us right smack dab back into the big questions. Today we install our new elders. They are the leaders of our church. We ask them to do a lot, figuring out the big questions and the little ones, helping us to be faithful. They are to help us be like Jesus. Whoa. I'm wondering how these three new... That's not fair. I mean, they're nice people and all, but they're only human. Exactly. They're human. And the big question for today is, what does it mean to be human? And I want to tell you at the beginning, it is very possible that the answer to that question, that big question, just may rearrange how we deal with the little ones. Our scripture is from the Gospel of Mark. Then Jesus went home. He'd been out doing his ministry and traveling and healing, and he went home, the place where he lived, where his family was. And the crowd came together again, even though he had gone in to be with his family, so that he could not even eat. The clamor was so great. When his family heard this and saw this, they went outside after Jesus had gone back out. They went out to restrain him because people were saying he is beside himself. Then his mother and his brothers came, and standing outside, they sent to him and called him. A crowd was sitting around, and his family said, "Your mother and your brother and your sisters are looking for you, asking for you." And he replied, "Who are my mother and my brothers?" And looking at those who sat around him, he said, "Here are my mother and brothers. Whoever does the will of God is my family." Let us pray. Holy One, be with your servants now and your servant, that the words spoken, the words heard, and all of our actions and thoughts today be well-pleasing in your sight. You who are our rock, our strength, and our place. Amen. Well, I'm sure that many of you, maybe not most, will know that football season has begun. And we're already talking about the Super Bowl. No, not because the Vikings are that good. I think most of us are used to not shooting that high. No, we're talking about the Super Bowl because the big game will be held right here in Minneapolis this year. More than one social commentator has said that if you want to know the measuring stick for what America wants and desires and values and aspires to and wants to become and wants to be like, then watch the Super Bowl. Many believe it to be the Super Bowl, the event in the life of our country. Now, I think it is fair to say that we, in this country at least, come to the viewing of the Super Bowl to observe the state of humanity and seen in the eyes of the world in our country. A snapshot, if you will, of the human, of what it means to be human in our culture and society. Now, of course, I'm not talking about the football game itself. Football is football. I mean, they do play a game there, but is it the main thing all about the halftime show and the commercials? I know people, plenty of them, who get up during the middle of the game prior to the commercial coming on so they can get their refreshments and be back to watch the commercial. Here is how I would describe this measuring stick seen in these images of the Super Bowl. Cool. Really cool. Thirsty for the right beverage, hungry for the right food, desperate. Desperate to have just the right car. Violent as a way of relating to the world outside of ourselves. Angry as an actual way of life and orientation. Centered on ourselves, our needs, looking out for number one, dancing to the accepted music, not being anyone's fool. One of my favorite all-time movies, and I know this will date me some, but that's okay. I still think it was a great, great movie, and I bet you not many of you saw it, was Harry and Son. In it, we learn of Howie, who was played by Robbie Benson. Howie is a recent graduate from high school, an aspiring writer, a poet, and an expert surfer, and the son of demolition crane operator who is played by Paul Newman. And yes, in case you're wondering, this is one of the 8 films that Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward starred in together. Howie, we learned, had cared deeply for a young woman, Cheryl, played by Ellen Barker. But something had gone wrong in their relationship. There had been a mix-up in communication, a misunderstanding, and they had split up. Cheryl was a very insecure young woman, and in the wake of this breakup, She went from one relationship to another, allowing herself to be used. She became pregnant, not even sure who the father was. In one scene, Howie is riding in the back of one of his friend's pickups and going down the road, and they pass Cheryl, who is walking down the road, big and pregnant, and their eyes meet. And Howie instinctively looks away. Are you kidding? He's nobody's fool. That's her problem. And watching the movie, we understand why Howie looks away, even if it hurts us to see him do it. Because in our own struggle to be human, to look out for number one, to do what makes sense, to not be anybody's fool or patsy, we understand why Howie looks away, even if we wish he did. To really make it in this life, in this world, you have to play by the rules. You don't even speak to somebody like Cheryl. Jesus' family, interestingly, had the same struggle. It wasn't that much different back then. I mean, there were I's to be dotted, T's to be crossed. There was the P's and Q's and do's and don'ts of etiquette. Jesus' family was a fine, upstanding one. Jewish family, they had respected laws and customs. You never did any work on Sabbath. You always respected the Pharisees, who were the ministers of the day. You never hung around drunk people or sick people or prostitutes or handicapped or people like that who had been labeled by the customs and culture of that day as not counting as much, as being riffraff. And Jesus' family believed that if you obeyed these laws and customs, if you danced to the music, if you looked out for number one and did what made sense, that somewhere in there you would discover what it meant to be human. The trouble was, the fly in the ointment was Jesus, their son, their brother, their friend. He was always out of step. No, that's not what I mean. That's way too tame. Jesus was always messing up. Jesus was a mess-up. If you wanted to see something wrong, some rule to be violated, etiquette to be trampled on, all you had to do was follow him around for a little while. He was always embarrassing people, out of step with the world around him. Just imagine being on a church like we are on a Sabbath morning, and after church we're standing around drinking some of Joyce's coffee, and the topic has been Jesus and his peculiarities, about how peculiar he is when he comes out of the synagogue and walks by. And one of the groups standing there says, now watch, you'll see what I mean, just watch it. Here we are on the Sabbath, there's a sick person over there, now just watch. Watch, see? He's headed right over there, what did I tell you? And what did I tell you? He's going to heal on the Sabbath. Working on the Sabbath. Bless him. And he's not through yet. See that leper over there? Watch. He's going to go right over there into the shadows. Unbelievable. Touching and untouchable, and on the Sabbath to boot. I'm telling you, Pratt, there's something wrong with that guy. Mark put it this way. Good old Mark, my favorite gospel writer. No minced words with Mark. He always said it exactly like it was. He always chose the most direct and raw language to the point of sometimes being embarrassing. The translation in the RSV and other translation falls short. He was beside himself. Oh, that's just such blah language to describe what happened. It's too sedated. What's really being said here, the best translation is given in the Jerusalem Bible. His family was convinced he was out of his mind. There you have it. They thought Jesus was crazy. This scripture is telling us that people in his time, many of them, thought the guy was nuts. We want to think of Jesus as being highly respected and widely revered, as a wise person, invited to all of the most important cultural functions, a frequent guest on the Rachel Maddow show or on Meet the Press. But friends, it just isn't so. They thought he was a nutcase. You know, if you look at the evidence, maybe they were right. He refused to dance to the music. He refused to avoid looking like a fool. Here comes Jesus again, this time with 12 ne'er-do-wells who have got scales all over them and smell like fish. And he says, they're going to change the world. I'm telling you, there's something wrong with this guy. And beloved, if the definition of being human is seen in the media, is seen in the Super Bowl commercials, it's seen in our current political leaders, some of them, who model selfishness and greed and violence and deceit. If that is what being human is, then hear me now. Jesus was crazy as a bedbug, and we better avoid him like the plague. But there is another possibility. I believe it. I have given my life to it, and I invite you to as well. It is this. Maybe Jesus is the most human being that has ever lived. And maybe Jesus has something to teach us about what it really means to be human. And maybe what he has to teach us can save us. And maybe, just maybe, what the world teaches us about being human is really, really wrong. Jesus taught us there is one law. You take all the laws that there are, all of the rules, and it comes down to one law. That we love God with all of ourselves, that we love our neighbor as ourselves. This is being human, Jesus taught. To love, not looking out for number one, but making somebody else number one. Not doing what makes sense, but doing what makes for love. Not avoiding being anybody's fool, but becoming a fool for Christ, as the apostle says. We see a glimpse of this in what happens later in the movie I was telling you about. Howie, a couple days later, spots Cheryl again. He's had some time to think. He spots her again, big and pregnant, this time walking down the sidewalk, hands, arms full of groceries, loaded, trying to get home. And he goes up to her and asks if he can help carry her. And she says yes. And they start to walk, and as they start to walk, they begin to talk, and they say things to each other that they should have said months and months ago. And they decide of all the most outlandish things to begin dating. And then in this conversation discover that they still care deeply for each other. And then a week or so later, they're out on a date, and Cheryl goes into labor. Howie calls a taxi, and in the back of the taxi, Howie delivers a baby boy. And in the next scene, they're on the hospital bed in Cheryl's room, and Howie holds the baby up in his arms and asking, "Hey, Tiger, how would you and your mom like to marry me and come be my family?" And Cheryl is watching and listening, and you know what she does? She covers herself completely with the sheet. It's like a little pup pin. And Howie says to the baby, "Tiger, what eyes you have. They're beautiful. They're just like your mom's." And then he puts his finger in the little tiny hand, and there's that little pressure that the little baby gives instinctively. And Howie goes, "Whoa, you're going to be a strong one." And then the strangest thing happens. The little pup tent begins to shake. It begins to shake slightly, and the sheets ripple. And then the tent begins to throb to the rhythm of Cheryl's weeping. She is sobbing. The whole bed is shaking with joy. Why? Because Cheryl has just gotten a glimpse of what it means to be human. Roxanne, Barb, Dawn. It's simple, really. What we need you to do, it's simple. But it's the hardest thing in the world to do. It's to challenge us in your life and ministry in our midst to be human. Lead us in this congregation to do outrageous acts of love, so that people will see us and will say, those people at that apostles' church